Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight we're confronting a crisis that too often stays behind closed doors, domestic violence. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and the reality in Prince George's County is very heartbreaking. More lives are lost to domestic violence in the county than anywhere else in the state. It's a sobering reminder that for far too many, home is not a place of safety. We are talking with advocates and service providers about what's fueling this deadly trend and what it will take to stop it. My guests are Arlene Joel, CEO and founder of Community Advocates for Family and Youth, commonly known as CAFE. Also, Clara Francie Cromer-Sowers, founder of CS Counseling Services. Ladies, thank you so much for joining the conversation, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Before I get into some of the fast facts, I want to ask you about something that has been recently in the news. The Prince George's County Sheriff's Department, along with the County Police Department, Maryland State Police, and other municipal law enforcement agencies did a domestic violence sweep across the county last week. They made 195 attempts. They made 83 arrests. They closed 90 warrants. I'll ask you first, Clara Francie, your reaction to hearing that news.
It was interesting to hear, especially the first time I saw it was on the news, and shocking. The sheriff's spokesperson did say that the reason why they were able to get, what they were able to apprehend was looking at all of the cases that were open where people failed to appear, even to those administrative orders. And so that was refreshing, but the numbers are still high.
Yeah,
extremely high.
There are 24,000 active warrants in the county. That, to me, Arlene, that number alone is eye-popping.
Yeah, it's concerning. It is definitely, when you think about 24,000, but it also shows that people are coming forth. And so, if they have a focus on serving the warrants and that sort of thing, that's a positive. But the 24,000 means that people are trying to do something. They're trying to survive.
What do you mean by that?
They're trying to survive. They're coming up. They're coming forward, trying to protect themselves for safety, trying to press charges, trying to hold that abuser accountable. And so when you're pursuing, justice on your behalf, that demonstrates that the community is getting stronger. The community is informed. The community knows where to go to get help.
One of the things I will also add in the video that the Sheriff's Department has released was that there appeared to be, in some of the clips that I've seen in the coverage, a significant number of women who were arrested. Certainly there were men, but in the video that I saw, there were women who were arrested. We know not only what the stereotypes are, but we also know what the statistics are, is that men have historically been the biggest perpetrators of domestic violence. But I would add that we also realize that women are as well. And, Clara Francie, seeing those women in handcuffs was, I thought it was interesting, to say the least.
Well, we also know too that our statistics say 1 in 4 women will be have a domestic violence encounter in their lifetime, 1 in 6 men. And so we also know too that men also report. their the guilt and the shame behind being a person that's been involved in a domestic violence episode can be very sobering. And so a lot of times they don't report just because of the fact of the embarrassment of being a victim. I can recall when I was a sheriff deputy trainee in Arlington County in 1988, they made it so that if they received a domestic violence call, either somebody was going in to protect the law enforcement, because what happens is maybe a person will report, maybe the man is arrested, and before they even get to the magistrate, the other person is saying, hey, I want to recant my, my report. And then sometimes law enforcement would get hurt in the process. So what did Virginia do? They said, hey, if we get a call, someone is going down, either the male or the female, but someone is going in. So, which makes domestic violence more of an equal justice or restorative justice initiative. And the reason why I say restorative justice is because we definitely need is the victim, the perpetrator, and the community all have a hand and need to be involved in domestic violence cases and the awareness, so that, as Arlene said, so more people are reporting and more people are not being guilty or ashamed of reporting. And so that's why this is so very important, that we see the balance, so that if men are being victims, they should not feel ashamed to report.
Yeah.
And I think, can I just add something? Because
Please
I
do.
think too, it's contributed to the approach that both the county police, municipalities, and the sheriff uses, because they're on the scene identifying who the aggressor is. And so whether the male victim is ashamed or not, if he's identified as a victim, then they're, arresting, if it's the female. And so I think by putting that process in place, it demonstrates a fairness when law enforcement shows up on a domestic violence incident.
So let me ask you this, Clara Francie, because you mentioned, your, even as a, law enforcement, trainee at one point, and I'm asking this as, as a man. I've never think I've been on the receiving end of domestic violence, nor have I been a perpetrator of such, and so I don't have a point of reference. But just thinking, as a man, if I had a wife or a domestic partner, a woman, is the assumption that no matter who makes the call, that the man may be the perpetrator, even if he says he is the victim? How do you deal with that? Because I would imagine, as as a man, if my wife or girlfriend or what have you, hit me upside the head with a frying pan, that it would, when the police come, she's going to say, no, I had to do it because he said this or he did this. How do you know?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the questions that you ask and the evidence that you see. I had a family member whose wife loved to hit. And he would hold her, by her arms to keep her from continuing to hit him. And when the police came on scene, they saw all the scratches on him. And so they asked, sir, did, she hit you? And he said, yes. And he says, and then she said, well, I was doing X, Y, Z. But you can clearly see that he had the bruises. But, you have to ask the right question and get all the evidence and make a determination of, who's the perpetrator, who's the, the victim in that particular incident.
So let me drill down a little bit more, because again, these are things as I'm just trying to work through this, in my own head. I'm sure that you've encountered situations where both were the perpetrators of domestic violence. He hit her first, and she hit back. It
Hmm.
and so it's no longer perpetrator and victim. It is both of you all are going toe to toe, duking it out. She's got a frying pan, and and he's got a belt, or it's all hands. Or how is that handled?
It's been a while, but
Hmm.
again, you have to look at the facts. And if it's a situation where maybe they both have to go down in separate cars, and that's what the situation is. The main thing is to provide safety to the individual so that the violence stops.
Hmm.
And another thing we have to be cognizant of too, if there's children around, these children see this.
Yes.
And at what point do we say we have to stop leaking domestic violence on the next generation? Because they are seeing what is happening.
What does that mean? I love that phrase. Stop leaking domestic violence on the
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit more about that. And Arlene, I want your thoughts about that as well.
Well, I can recall when I was going up for ordination at my church,
Hmm.
because I'm an ordained minister. And one of the questions was, the Bible says a woman ought to be everything to her husband. And I smiled and I said, yeah. And there's a couple of verses above that it says a man ought to love his wife like Christ loves the church.
Hmm.
And I don't think Jesus would be abusing the church. So the same thing happens in those situations when we try to use scripture, to say, well, she ought to do all of this stuff so that he doesn't do such and such and such and such. It goes both ways. It's and then when you see the children, if they see that a lot, what do you think they're going to mimic when they are in those situations where when they have girlfriends or boyfriends? What do you think they're going to see? And that's what happened with that family member. That family member saw her mother always being the aggressor to her dad. So that was the norm for her. And so what happened? She did the same thing in her intimate relationships of what she saw her mother do. That's what we call leaking. She mimicked what she saw.
Arlene, your thoughts about that term, leaking domestic violence to the children?
Well, I wrote it down as well, Claire Francie, so I'll be using that too.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's just
it,
such it is such a perfect description.
right. It really is, because so oftentimes, for the survivors that we work with, they say, oh, it's never happened in front of our children. They've been upstairs, out of sight view, but children hear. That's the
Mm-hmm.
one thing. And even if someone's carrying a child, that agitation, that effort to always, be stressed out, walking on eggshells, can impact that, baby that you're carrying. But the one point that Clara Ferenczi made as well was that that's your norm. You believe as you grow up that, oh, that's how relationships are. Yeah, my parents fought all the time, but they stayed together. And so that's the piece that needs to be addressed. And
Mm-hmm.
even with children that demonstrate bullying, that's a start of them
Mm-hmm.
developing that power and control wheel over another person. And so encouraging parents who maybe aren't in a domestic violence environment, but to address that behavior very quickly. And so educating children early, not only about good touch, bad touch, but what does healthy interaction, between two people look like, and
Mm-hmm.
how can they tell the difference? And I think that's really critical. And educating the parents that secondary trauma is real.
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I am going to take a break. We are going to continue with this conversation. I still have so many more questions, but I think we really started off well because we went down a path that I think a lot of, of people have questions about, and I appreciate both of you helping me to answer some of those. Don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our discussion about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. My guests are Clara Francie Cromer-Sowers, founder of CS Counseling Services, and Arlene Joel, CEO and founder of Community Advocates for Family and Youth, also known as CAFE. I want to drill down a little bit more on just kind of where we are right now, Arlene, when we have the highest number of domestic violence homicides in Prince George's County compared to any other county in the state. What's going on? Why do you suppose that is?
Part of it is, the ability to resolve conflict, right? And also the other part is recognizing that someone who abuses, their behavior, their thought process, really has to be retrained. Mm-hmm. And so if they can't control the fact that, they can't dominate someone else, and, perhaps the person's leaving because that's the highest, dangerous time in a domestic violence situation, or there's they lose control of that person. All of those kind of dynamics can contribute to that final, not only a homicide, but, homicide, suicide events occur as well. Because the person can no longer control that other person, and then they themselves don't want to live either.
So let me ask the elephant in the room question. Prince George's County has the highest percentage of Black people in the county, even though it is not the most populous county. Montgomery County is. And so what's wrong with Black people that we can't seem to get to address that? I mean, I'm just going to be honest. If the numbers are the highest in Prince George's, what's going on with Black people?
I think that you're right. I'm more likely to be a victim of domestic violence than my white counterpart. But at the same time, when you contribute our history of violence against us, of discrimination against us, of the educational, even education gap, right? Of underemployment and unemployment. All of those things contribute to what have you learned as you've grown up. And so if you contribute those factors, they could be contributors to us having the higher population. And then when you think about, even if I am abused, I have to think about, do I want to report it? I just did a workshop on Saturday, and one of the survivors talked about the fact that she didn't report because she didn't want to see another Black man involved in the justice system. And so we have a lot of dynamics that we have to work through if we're a survivor and if we're the abuser, before we even take a step towards eliminating domestic violence.
Clara Francie, same question, and I think Arlene put it, well, and especially in that example. I mean, that's almost pathological, where you are accepting of an abuse by your Black partner, but at the expense of your own safety, you would prefer not to see him, or in some cases her, be subjected to the issues in the criminal justice system.
You also have to look at the fact that for a long period of time, the economic power that a lot of Black women had in the workforce. And we also know, too, that when women leave, they have to also leave with their children. So a lot of times when they leave with what they can carry, what they have on their back. Okay. And then also it's like 1 in 7. Sometimes it takes 7 times for this to happen for them to leave. Right. So with that being said, and if we also look at, I give an example, Maya Angelou, we know why the cage bird sings. Look at that story when that young woman, that young teenager spoke. That was the death of that individual. And so now you're worrying about, if I tell, what will my father, brother, what will the men in my family, or even some of the women, what will they do to him? Do I want to be responsible for that person's demise because I said something? And that's even one of the reasons why, as some of us in the mental health field, as a mandatory reporter, we don't report the same way we do with children, domestic violence, because it could cause the death of someone. It could cause injury to someone. So all those factors are taken into account when that person is thinking about, oh my goodness, And then we also know too, when women are sentenced, and especially if we look at some of our stand your ground states, their sentencing is much higher than the perpetrator. So they're also thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about a little recent trend as it relates to addressing the issue of domestic violence. We do know that whether it's domestic violence, education, the economy, the world has changed as a result of the pandemic. So let's talk about the landscape of domestic violence post-pandemic. Arlene, how would you characterize it?
Well, we think post-pandemic, we're just starting to recover, right? People were isolated, which creates more stress. If you're already in a volatile household and situation, that creates more stress. People are still underemployed and unemployed, even post-pandemic. And so all of those triggers and all of those challenges, think of the thousands of children that we lost that never returned to school, right? And so that's a missed opportunity to teach or for children to learn healthy relationship styles. All of the men who may be underemployed, who's impacted by self-esteem issues, that also happens kind of post-pandemic. And so it's not just the fact that, oh my gosh, domestic violence is happening in our community as Black people. It's looking at all of those external factors that contribute to who I am and how I can handle all of those. And I think that that's very important. You look at the old adage too, what happens in the home stays in the home.
Exactly.
And so if I still preach that in my home and to my children, everybody's still at risk. And then the other thing, they talk about this whole, trauma bonding where like I'm involved in it. I understand it. I understand that devil right there. And I know how to manage that, whether I'm getting beaten or not, I know it. And so when you look at all of those dynamics, we want to eliminate it, but it takes a whole generation and every person in the community to be involved in order to have a significant impact in reducing and eliminating domestic violence, family violence, teen dating, elder abuse. All of those come under violence within the home, under domestic violence.
Mhm.
And Clara Francie, the furloughs of earlier this year and now the government shutdown, none of that helps.
No, I mean, if you think about how many African American women who are probably primary breadwinners in their family have lost their jobs. So we're talking about what, upwards of over 350,000. In our area alone, how many federal employees that are dependent upon, the federal government as their source of income. And now we're getting ready to go into the holidays, and we're talking about this week is going to be the first probably week that they won't get a check.
Right.
And a lot of families are maybe one or two paychecks away from, no savings, homelessness, just because of our cost of living. So all of those social factors go into play when you start talking about violence.
Well, the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, said just 2 weeks ago that more than 15,000 Marylanders had lost their jobs, and the layoffs, the furloughs, and at least half of that 15,000 were women. And let's be honest, the lion's share of those people are first coming from those counties that ring DC, Prince George's County, Charles County, and Montgomery County. And,
right.
And we know that the face of probably half of those are Black women.
True.
Yeah, I have a lot of my own clients. Some of them were not in the government very long and took the delayed resignation. And so now, and some of them retired, and because of the shutdown, they're waiting on that first check, but maybe it didn't get processed because that person was furloughed. Or because a lot of federal employees have left the federal government, you have oversaturation of unemployed people in the workplace, and some of the employers can now lowball them because they know there's a saturation. So all of those things play into a person's, psyche, and and then they're having the racing thoughts, the depression, they pray as much as they need to and rely on God, but at the end of the day, we have to admit that a lot of us anxiousness is just becoming a part of the norm. Right. So along with that anxiousness comes other things that happen that could be very detrimental. And domestic violence is one of them. And it's not just Black people, it's BIPOC people. You have a lot of people who are some of our Latino brothers and sisters who are not going to report because they're worried about immigration, and they're worried about whether or not they're going to be, taken in. And so that's another factor that, we have to think about when it comes to domestic violence. Should I even report?
I do want to share with our listeners a little bit more about each of your organizations before we get too much into some of the other questions that I have. So Arlene, and you've been on this program before, but talk to us about what services CAFI provides.
So we're a social services organization, and so we provide advocacy, navigation through understanding once you do report a crime, kind of what the next steps are, because when someone calls 911, they think it's the end of it, and it's a whole new language that they're entering into. So a lot of our effort is victim advocacy, but we also offer mental health services, legal representation, because all too often the survivor is at the courthouse not being represented, trying to self-represent, and often can't present their case in the appropriate manner to win. And so legal representation is very important. individual counseling because we know it's a traumatic experience, but we're also focused on, how that family survives, how that unification happens. Children are sometimes very angry that the survivor has reported and now our family is broken up. And so, we have a Strengthening Families program, which really kind of gives that new family, that new unit, the opportunity to decide how they will move forward. But we do also offer, 24-hour access for safe havens. We're in partnership actually with the program in California where we can place someone in safe housing anonymously and without ID. Because when you leave, sometimes you leave with nothing. And not to be able to have access to a hotel stay or something like that because you left your purse, it's heartbreaking for one thing because everyone can't go to the shelter. Maybe I have a 16-year-old son that lives with me and he can't go with me. And children are at risk if the survivor leaves on, by themselves. And so we often address that. We operate under an MOU with the public school system to do education around healthy relationships, conflict resolution, that kind of thing. And so we are in some of the schools preaching, that as well as, community education.
And Clara Francie, about CS Counseling Services.
So CS Counseling Service, I am an independent, nationally and state licensed clinical mental health counselor, professional counselor. And so I work with two organizations. I help do counseling as well as in my church, as well as provide education. And one of my things that I'm doing right now is my doctoral work around domestic violence and how do we help pastors whose congregate may come to them because of the stigma surrounding mental health and that they're more comfortable going to their pastor than maybe coming to a mental health clinician. How do we train those pastors that when a person comes to them with a domestic violence or a trauma situation, yes, there's spirituality that needs to be addressed, but also how do you refer them to an organization like CAFE or to a mental health counselor to help them with that trauma piece? And so that's my life work. And this is some of the things that I do to help in the community. I've had several clients, a lot of them women, who have I come to and I talk to about trauma from a professional standpoint, but also myself, as 25 years ago, I was a victim of domestic violence myself in my first marriage. So I have firsthand account of what it feels like to be in that situation.
You conduct one-on-one counseling with not only the victims of domestic violence, but also perpetrators?
Yes. Anyone who will come seeking my services. And so I am, one of the things that I'm working with besides training pastors also is to help, from a restorative justice standpoint, how do we help those perpetrators to stop? What are some of the things that's happening in their life and who do they need to talk to? The American Counsel Association has this program called Brother, Are You Okay? Where they taught during the pandemic, they taught the barbers how to have conversations with the brothers about their own mental health journeys and how, who do they need to talk to? And so, yes, I think we need more of those conversations and more of those services so that people know that there are people out here who are willing to help you if you want to take the journey and to be helped.
Well, that brings me to my next question, and that is why I asked how your services and you specifically work with the client. So my question is, and this is another one of those really foundational questions. Certainly I can intellectualize it, but the bottom line is, and I've said this for years on this program, I just don't understand how you can hit a woman because your daddy told you not to do it. Okay. And, but that notwithstanding, when you've had counseling sessions with the perpetrator, and let's just go with, since I'm a man, and this is why I'm asking, what do they tell you is the reason why feel they feel that it is necessary to hit their spouse or partner when they are angry, no matter what no matter what it is. If this is stereotypical, he comes home from work and the chicken is overcooked or undercooked or something like that, and he decides, instead of saying, well, baby, you need to put this in the oven a little bit longer, or baby, you may have cooked this a little too much. Let's go out and get a bucket of chicken or what have you. What makes him want to hit her? What do they tell you?
Well, it's what Arlene was talking about that power and control paradigm. One of the things I do is when I first meet a client, I go back and do a genogram. I go back 3 generations. I try to find out where the breakdown is that caused this person first to come see me, and what are, like I said, what are the things they're mimicking, what are the things they are seeing, and then also what kind of coping skills does this person really need to be able. I mean, we can disagree. That doesn't mean you need to be disagreeable,
Right.
But what kind of coping skills and what have they seen, and how do you, maybe, I've even told some of my clients, let's do the 4-7-8 breathing technique. Cause I know there's probably folks on death row where you sit back and you breathe in and you breathe out and you hold it before you say anything.
It's like counting to 10.
Right. But, and think while you're doing it. Because there are folk on death row, if they probably got those 10 seconds back, they would have made a different decision.
And maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but again, I think for me and for a lot of people who have never, and look, we're human, we get mad, okay, and sometimes we may use a colorful metaphor in expressing ourselves when we shouldn't. But there are some households, as you are both aware, where never a hand is raised. There are some households where, for whatever reason, sometimes never a voice is raised. And yet we know, because of the statistics as it relates to domestic violence, homicides, and just domestic violence in general, and abuse, that, as we said in the beginning of this conversation, that home is not a safe place. And I guess I'm trying to look at this foundationally, Arlene, where what is going through a person's head where they would hit their partner, because you're not hitting anybody at work when you have a disagreement. Okay. You're having disagreement with your girlfriends that you go out with happy hour for, or the guys that you're playing basketball with that you may not, but then you come home. So break it down for me. Is that okay when we know it's not okay?
I think when you think about an abuser, I don't know if all those scenarios are accurate, because the best friend of the abuser may say, "Oh yeah, Joe's like a hothead," but it doesn't mean anything to his best friend, right? His family may say, he's so sensitive, and he gets upset so easily, but he's not punching out his mother, right?
Right.
He may argue with a coworker, but not go as far enough to get fired.
Don't meet me out in the parking lot. We're not doing
exactly
that. Right.
But when he's at home, that place where they believe they have that power and control, that's when they have the opportunity, for lack of a better word, to explode. Because look at all these people that, took advantage of me or degraded me, or I was in conflict with all day and I couldn't say a word. It doesn't mean that they, lack any more control than they do at home. They're just expressing it a different way.
Yeah.
Because think about it, they disrupt the workplace of for the place that the survivor works, right? All too often.
Mm-hmm.
They're disrupting the life even before maybe that survivor leaves for work. So that's okay. That's a release. And now they can go off to work and do what they need to do. So there's that intermittent period of time where they're, for lack of a better word, preparing themselves for the external forces.
Mm-hmm. Listen, ladies, I only have a few minutes left, and I've got to get this question in. And both of you may have the same answers, but I want to hear from both of you because I think this is also the most important thing. Man or woman, doesn't matter whether it's a heterosexual relationship or same-sex relationship. If you feel that you are unsafe and you need to get out, and I'll start with you, Clara Francie, how do you get out and get out safely?
Well, you have to think about it and start maybe thinking about your strategy way in advance. As far as look up, find out all the resources that you have available. Who do you tell that can help you and keep their mouth closed so they're not leaking your business off to other people? Because I want to say this one thing too. Domestic violence is not just physical. It's also economic, and emotional and verbal. And so sometimes that's just as lethal as hitting somebody when you take away their economic power away from them. So, but the main thing is you have to strategize and you have to seek those services. That's one of the reasons why we have to make this information known of how people can, utilize this, organizations like myself and with Kathy and the Family Justice Center to know what your options are. This is not just a me thing or a family thing. This is the livelihood of our communities.
Arlene, I'll let you have the last word about that.
And I agree. We say don't try to do it alone. You can safety plan from wherever you are. You can safety plan within your home to, position yourself, arm your children with cell phones, create a code word if they know, so that they'll know things are really getting out of hand. Start putting up the birth certificates, all the documentation that you might need for that one night where you've had enough and you're ready to flee. You'll have everything ready for you, and your children will understand this is the time.
I just want to say the month is not yet over, and I'm sure we're going to have these conversations beyond October. I would love to have both of you back because we really just kind of talked about some of the important but still surface issues. There are so many other issues that I'm sure that both of you can discuss. So I would love to have you all come back really, really soon. Excellent information, Arlene Joelle, Clara Francie, Cromer Sowers, and I'm going to be posting the contact information for your organizations on our website on WHUR.com. That'll be after 7:00 this evening. Ladies, thank you so much. I really
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, October 21st. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.